Good evening. We all know some kind of negative people who tend to take even the positive things in life and look at them in a negative light. If you don't know that person, you are that person, and you should not do that. Well, I heard about one negative person who described preaching in an overly negative way, I think. They said that preaching is the fine art of talking during someone else's sleep. Some of you relate. No. That may be a bit strong, but one of the occupational hazards of preaching is that you lose people's attention. It's just how it works, right? I know my fair share about that. Even before I came here in preaching school, I would go to this little church a couple hours away from where I was going to school once a month, go out to this church. And it was 10 to 15 members, a very, small church, just good folks, tiny auditorium. So I go there, and without fail, this is 10 to 15 people, so it's not like you're hiding in this room. Without fail, 3 minutes into the sermon, old farmer named Zeke in the back, right there, right about where you are, Ray. Not saying anything, but no, right about where Ray is, old Zeke would be asleep every time. I mean, you could, and not just asleep, snoring. I mean, so loud. It was impressive. I mean, I could get up there, I could yell for the first 3 minutes. I could yell his name for the first 3 minutes. He's going to be asleep after 3 minutes. It's just how it worked. And I didn't hold anything against him. He was a great guy, a farmer, like I said, worked hard. But it's just how it was. He just struggled sitting down and paying attention to someone getting up and talking for a while. Now, that used to bother me. And it still does to some extent when people are struggling to pay attention, when people fall asleep. But I do take some comfort in the fact that when Jesus was here on earth, there were even some people who got to hear him, who didn't really get all that he was trying to say. Look at Luke chapter 12, because this is one example of this. Luke chapter 12, Luke tells us that there are thousands of people who come to hear Jesus. It says that they're literally trampling over each other because there are just too many people gathered in this one place. And Jesus is preaching this awesome sermon because it's what he does, right? He's Jesus. He's laying down the law. He's talking about hell and hypocrisy and the Holy Spirit, all kinds of powerful subjects. And midway through this sermon, this guy elbows his way to the front of this crowd of thousands of people. And he demands of Jesus. He says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, who knows what was going on in this man's life? Apparently, he felt that his brother either wasn't acting fast enough or fair enough. But either way, he could feel this money that was his slipping out of his grasp. And he couldn't let that happen. So he comes to Jesus. And Jesus does what he does a lot, which is he takes this physical problem and he presents its spiritual solution. So we can't read all of this, but in verse 14, he turns to the crowd. He says, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." That word covetousness, it's not a word that we use very often. Basically, it's just wanting more and more and more of what you already have enough of. It's being greedy. And about that topic, Jesus says here, be on your guard. Watch out for it. Why? Because this thing, this greed, has a way of blinding us spiritually, of distorting everything else that we see. And that's why in other places Jesus talks about the deceitfulness of riches. Because money lies to us. Raises lie to us. Bonuses lie to us. Inheritances lie to us. That's what this inheritance is doing to this young man here. It's saying, hey, you need me. You don't realize what your life could be if you had me. I mean, honestly, when you think about it, I am your life. Because if you don't get me, what kind of life are you going to live? Not the life that you deserve. You don't realize how big I am for you. Without me, your life won't really be life. It won't be true life. It's lying to him. I've grown up going to church my whole life. I've been in an auditorium Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, probably every other day throughout the week for most of my life. And I've had a lot of conversations with fellow Jesus followers about things that we struggle with. And you know, in my 22 years of being here on earth, I've never had anybody come up to me and say, hey, I need to talk to you about something. I got to be honest. I'm really struggling with greed. I just like money too much. You know, I've never had that happen. And I talked to my dad this week. My dad's a preacher. He's been in ministry for 40 years. I asked him if he'd ever had anybody come to him and talk about struggling with greed. He said never. In his 40 years, he's never had anybody who's come to him and said, I'm struggling with covetousness. I just want stuff. Now, compare that with the fact that 15% of what Jesus says in the Gospels is about money. And none of it's good. None of it's positive. So if Jesus talks that much about it to people who are much poorer than we are, and if we don't think about it, then I don't think the problem is on Jesus' end. I think it's on mine. Now, I think the reason why we don't really talk about it, why we don't really think about it, is because we are all so absolutely sure that it's not me. I mean, I have friends who live more extravagantly than me. I have relatives who live more extravagantly than me. So, just like that, I'm blind. I've been deceived. Just like that, I'm not rich or spoiled or greedy because I can look at this guy and he's more rich and spoiled and greedy. And that guy can look at the next guy and he can say the same exact thing. And before you know it, we go on this line where none of us are convicted or can be convicted about how we view money because it just feels so right to be comfortable. It feels right to live for myself, to take care of myself. And then I'll give a little bit to the church. I'll give a little bit to homeless people. I'll give to my grandkids, to my kids. I'll give. But really, my money is still all about me. And just like that, we're blind. We never ask ourselves the tough questions like, should I really be saving this much for retirement? Should I really be spending this much money on clothes, on fast food, on golf? I'll look directly up. On golf. I'm not looking at anybody in particular. But should I be? Jesus says here that my life is not about my stuff. He says, what does he say in verse 14? Your life does not consist in the abundance of your possessions. Your stuff. What kind of stuff? Well, big stuff, little stuff, stuff you drive in, stuff you live in, stuff you hunt with and fish with and wear. That kind of stuff. That stuff is not my life. And not only is it not my life, Jesus actually says that it can take my life. And he wants to nail that point right into our thinking. So he tells a story. It's a story about a farmer who made it big in agriculture. He got rich. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with becoming rich. Jesus doesn't paint him in dark colors. He's just a farmer. And he's a successful one at that, which means that he's a hard worker. Because you don't succeed at farming unless you work hard. And that's a good thing. Working hard is a good thing. If you walked by this man's place early in the mornings, when most of us, starting with me, are still asleep, then you'll see him out there tinkering with his equipment. He's getting ready for the day. And if you walked back by, again, late that night, you probably would see his candle or his windows lit by candlelight. He's poring over his plans and his production, probably over the book of Proverbs, right? He's a good guy. He's a Jew, a Bible-believing Jew. He's invested in this. He's successful, and he's making progress because this year has been an especially good one, which means that he has a problem. Because up until now, his problems have been with production. He's been trying to make as much as he can. But now, his problems are with storage. He has to be able to store all this stuff that he's earned. So his only solution, or his best solution, is to tear down his old barns, those rinky-dink small things, and to build bigger ones, to build new ones. That's his solution. That's what he's going with. That's progress, right? And we admire progress. This man would have been looked up to in the community. He's successful, and he's becoming more so. He's making progress. And whatever is coming to him, whatever good he has coming, he's earned it. He's a good guy. Now Jesus, in this point of the story, tells us about one night in this man's life. Can you picture it? He's sitting there at a desk beside his architect. And sprawled out on the desk in front of them are these blueprints. And the farmer says to the architect, says, at one time, I was known as the best farmer in this whole area. Then I was known as the best farmer in the entire Jordan Valley. That's a big place. And when we have this project completed, I'll have the best farm in Israel. He's made it. And so they keep working into the night. And at some point, the farmer's wife comes downstairs. She says, honey, you better be getting to bed. You've been up late for just about every night the past couple of weeks. You need your sleep. So the architect says, well, I better be heading home too. So he says, I'll look over these plans. I'll bring them back to you for approval. We'll reconvene tomorrow. So the farmer walks the architect over to the door, and he shuts the door against the night. But he can't go to sleep. The adrenaline is pumping, right? So he starts running the numbers. He starts trying to figure out, how much are all of these barns going to cost? How much for a new house? How much for my taxes and my insurance? And I've got to buy something for my wife. I'm doing all this, I've got to buy something. How much? He's got to run the numbers. And as he's working hard, suddenly there's a knock at his door. And so he walks over to the door, but before he can even open it, the presence is in the room. So the farmer says, who are you? He says, I'm Death. Death? I didn't know you were coming. You didn't tell me you were coming. I don't have you on my appointment book. And Death says, no, I told you. I told you when I took your partner a few years ago. Remember that? I told you when I took the young man next door. I told you every time a funeral train went by your house. I told you. And now I'm here to count you down. So 10, 9, 8, 9, whoa. The wealthy farmer says, hey, hold on, let's make a deal. I'll give you half of everything I have. Half of all I've accumulated. It's yours. Just let me live. You think I have use for your toys? You think I want the stuff that got you in this place to begin with? 5, 4, 3. Whoa, hold on. You can have it all. Take it all. I'll start at the beginning. Just let me live. And Death, with just a wave of his hand, counts him out. Now that farmer had prepared for life. But everything for which he had prepared was taken away, just like that, by the one thing he had forgotten. So the next morning, the farmer's wife comes downstairs. She finds him slumped across his desk. And so she goes to wake him up. And she finds out that he's gone. So there's a lot of mourning in that house. But they have a funeral. It's a big funeral. Everybody shows up. This man was well known in the community. He's respected. The mayor is giving the eulogy. And at one point in it, he looks at the young people in the crowd. And he points at the coffin. He says, here's a man who you want to become. You want to be like this man. And everybody joins in. And somebody says, he was the best farmer in the whole Jordan Valley. And eventually the funeral ends and they make their way over to the cemetery. They bury him in the ground. They put a stone slab on top of him. They put a birth date, death date on it, maybe a scripture. And then everybody heads back because everybody has their own stuff to get. And then that night, an angel of God comes across the cemetery. And he gets to this new stone slab, and he just writes one word on it. F-O-O-L. Fool. Now, this man wasn't an atheist. He was just as religious as anybody else. He probably would be in here right now. But if you believe that God exists, and then for all practical purposes, live as though He doesn't, God says that you're a fool. That I'm a fool. Now, at the end of the story, if you look in the text, there's this mocking phrase, this question. These things that you have prepared, whose will they be? Now, I've read this story a bunch of times in my life, but I never connected this. Do you remember what started this whole thing? What initiated this story? Well, it's that man coming to Jesus and saying, I want my inheritance. Tell my brother, divide the inheritance with me. So Jesus ends the story with this question. Those things, that stuff. What does he say? Whose will they be? Well, the guy who has left his inheritance for these two brothers, it's not his, right? And those two brothers, one day, again, whose will that stuff be? It's not going to be theirs. They're going to leave it all behind. Everything that you own, everything that I own, one day, it's going to be somebody else's. Now, should that make us depressed? I don't think so. I think it should make us detached. To say, I don't find my identity and my validation and my worth in my stuff. Because one day, that's somebody else's. Because this story is not about, really it's not about making a lot of stuff. We're making a lot of money. It's not about becoming rich. It's not saying, you make this much money, therefore you're in sin. That's not what this is about. Some of you probably make a lot of money. Some of you, God blessed with the talents and abilities and personalities to make a lot of money, and you should. God gave you that gift. The problem isn't making a lot of money. This man wasn't called a fool because he was a productive farmer. He didn't die for that. He died because of verse 21. So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Rich toward God. That's a strange phrase. But the meaning of it is pretty clear in the contrast here. It's whatever it is, it's the opposite of laying up treasure for yourself, of getting and staying rich for yourself. It means that I'm using whatever earthly riches I have to show how valuable God is to me, not how valuable I am to me. And that is precisely what this failed farmer didn't do. He wasn't rich toward God. He was just rich. Now, this is a very simple story. In short, a guy makes a lot of money, and he needs somewhere to keep the stuff that he bought with the money. Nothing crazy about that, right? He works hard, he earns it, and then he just wants to retire with what he's worked so hard for, and to eat, drink, be merry, or party with the other retirees, right? That's all he wants. It's a simple story. And really, when you think about it, that is what we think of as the American dream. Make your money, keep your money, live off your money. That's what everybody wants. We want to live that American dream. And in this parable, in this text, Jesus takes that very American dream and he points at it. Points directly in its face. And he says, look, that's an example of greed. He takes that idea and he says, this is exactly what you don't want to do. Because one day, that knock is coming. For you, for me. And at that point, God's going to demand the loan that is my life back. Now, I never thought about this before, but my life is a loan. Your life is a loan. You didn't buy it. You didn't earn it. I certainly didn't. God gave it to you. He gave it to me. And He can have it back whenever He wants because it's His. You know, so much of our culture is telling us to lay hold of our lives. To say, this is my life. I'm going to live it how I want to live it. I'm going to find my authentic self. I need my rights valued. Or else. Because it's about me. It's my life. But God says no. That's mine. And at any time, I can... And it's coming right back. And when that happens, when that moment happens, I want to have lived as someone, not as someone who was laying up treasures here on earth. Not as someone who lived the American dream. Not as someone who got my money, kept my money, and then lived off my money. But as someone who is rich toward God. As someone who used whatever money I get to say and show how much I value God and not me. To say to God, look, whatever I make, it's not mine. I'm not telling you to empty out your bank accounts tonight. I'm not telling you to empty out your retirement savings and give the money to the first person who needs it that you meet. There's some wisdom here. But I am saying that our culture, the world that we live in, is incredibly consumeristic. I've spent a lot of time this past week just reading a lot of passages, just what the New Testament says about money. And it honestly scares me because it's radical. It's not comfortable. And it's not what our culture looks like. And it's not what most Christians in our culture look like. So for me, I want to be able to say to God, look, I've taken this loan of my life and my money, whatever talents you gave me, and I tried to use it in the best way that I possibly could. I tried to use that money specifically in a way that said, it's more blessed to give than to receive. Because if you've ever experienced that, if you've ever experienced the blessedness of giving, you know, true giving is much more blessed than just receiving stuff. That's why Jesus said it, Acts 20, verse 35. It's more blessed to get rid of your stuff than to accumulate more stuff. God blesses us not to change our standard of living, but to change our standard of giving. To say, my life is not about me, and neither is my money. It's about Him, and it's about them. It's about everybody else. That's tough. But I think it's the best way to live. After all, it's more blessed to give than to receive. If you have something you need to make right tonight publicly, won't you do it as we stand and as we sing?